Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. It's not over yet, folks. The latest on Brexit. We tell you what you need to know. Also, what should we make of all this talk of secession in the United States? Is a divorce in the cards? To discuss these stories and more, I'm joined by my guest, Glenn Diesen in Oslo. He is an associate professor at the University of Southeastern Norway, as well as author of the upcoming book, Russian Conservatism. And in London, we have Marcus Papadopoulos. He is the editor of Politics First magazine. All right, gentlemen, Crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. Okay, let's go to Marcus in London. Give us an update on Brexit. I mean, all year long, they've had to get this trade deal into place. And of course, at the very end, at the end of the wire, we still don't have one. And of course, from what I've been following is that it is unlikely. And there's a lot of scaremongering, but there's still a lot of questions as well. What my question is, after 4 long years of this, why are there still questions? I mean, you got a lot of smart people in your country, maybe not politicians, but come on, explain to us why we're still talking about it.
Well, Peter, the Brexit story is fast approaching its endgame because whilst Britain left the European Union in political terms on the 31st of January of this year, on the 31st of December of this year, Britain will leave the EU, both economically and legally. Britain is in transition at the moment, and after the 31st of December of this year, the transition cannot be extended. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has said there is absolutely no doubt that the transition will not be extended. However, the Labour Party is calling for a transition, which demonstrates that Labour has not learned the reasons for why it was annihilated at the general election of last year. And it shows that Labour is continuing to condescend the people of the former Labour heartlands in the Midlands, in the north of England, and in Wales. Now, can Britain and the EU secure a free trade deal by the 31st of December? I put it to you, Peter, that is looking increasingly unlikely. However, if that is the case, if a free trade deal is not secured, it will not be a catastrophe, as a lot of people in Britain are saying, specifically neoliberals, because what it will mean is that Britain will trade according to world trade rules. However, it is true that a deal would be conducive for both London and Brussels, but we are still hearing from neoliberals in Britain who said that in June 2016, if the British people voted for Brexit, there would be a recession. Well, that didn't happen. Then they said at the beginning of this year, if Britain leaves the EU politically on the 31st of January, there will be a recession. Now the same people are saying, if Britain leaves the EU economically and legally and in legal terms on the 31st of December, Britain will go into recession. There won't be food across Britain. That will not happen. Yes, I would like there to be a free trade deal, but if there's not, there will not be a catastrophe.
You know, Glenn, I mean, everything we just heard from Marcus is that, given all of the reasons, or moving the goalpost all of the time, or reinventing the same story over and over again with a scaremongering context here, is that there's just elements of the establishment, the people that hold a neoliberal ideology are just simply unwilling to accept the democratic will of the people. And a lot of these people have power and influence, and they keep dragging their feet. Of course, if there is no deal at the end of the year, yep, there'll be hiccups and bumps in the road, but it's not going to be the end of the world here. Okay, maybe the end of their world, and maybe that's what they're afraid of. Okay, and not what average people have to go through here. For goodness sake, 4 years to think about this. Go ahead, Glenn.
Yeah, no, well, this is problematic for your listeners who are younger. They might not be familiar with the origin story, because again, this was in June 2016. It's been 4.5 years, and the discussion is now pushing it further down the line. It is problematic. You often hear the argument put forward that, we should at least continue talking. But this is also problematic, because as any economist can tell you, uncertainty is extremely dangerous for economies, because Britain can always rewire its supply chains, it can find new markets, it can adapt to the new situation. But then first, the new status quo has to establish itself in order for the new investments to come in and adjustments to be made. It's often the uncertainty which is a problem. So simply kicking the can further down the road is not necessarily a great thing. Now, I would add that it's not necessarily that we reach the end of the line here and we will have a hard Brexit because well, obviously it doesn't look good because this is the end of the negotiations and the EU seems to be hardening its position. And the UK is also, well, even now preparing its navy to use warships from keeping foreign fishermen out of its seas. So obviously both sides are intensifying their positions, but this can be interpreted in two ways. That is, the first would be that this is merely tactical. Anyone who knows the EU's negotiations recognize that they often wait until the last minute before they will strike a deal for this, maximum pressure. And the UK, which has often been on the same side of the negotiation table as Brussels, also then seemingly playing the same game. Alternatively, and I'm starting to lean towards this, which is that their differences simply can't be reconciled. That is, the EU is largely pursuing this very federalist objective in which they're seeking the centralization of power in Europe. And even if Britain leaves, it has to be part of this regulatory framework where Britain decides its regulations, its laws. Meanwhile, the UK for endless decades now have been arguing that their vision of Europe is one where they maintain national sovereignty and they don't centralize power. So it's not merely a trade deal. And I don't think this underpinning views of what Europe should be has been changed in any way. So I would lean towards a no-deal Brexit. Otherwise, you have other consideration, other problematic issues as well. What can Boris really do? If he takes an unfavorable deal home, he's going to revive the divisions within the Conservatives and he's going to revive Nigel Farage party and you're going to start the same thing again. Keep in mind that David Cameron only accepted this referendum on the idea that he hoped it would put this EU issue to bed and finally unite the Conservatives and push Nigel Farage out of politics. If they don't get a proper EU deal, which the Brexiteers want, you're going to be back at step one. So I don't see what they can really do.
I find it really amazing. David Cameron did, he said he would call a referendum, but he was not under any obligation to do. I'm one of the biggest fools in British politics, okay? And that's saying something because there's plenty of them around. Marcus, it's interesting what Glenn had to say because again, this exit process, even though the UK will have a semblance of its own sovereignty and its own trade policy, regulatory policy, but the EU won't let go. It's like a death hug. Okay, is it? We'll give you a trade deal, but you have to follow our regulations, and we're going to, and you're going to have to adapt to us. There's constantly that. Okay, it isn't a negotiation among equals. No, one is a junior partner, and its ideology drives that the way the Brussels looks at the UK, because you need us, and no. I mean, you need each other, certainly to one degree or another, but their narrative is constantly is what you have to do for us. And the British electorate said, that's not how we want to do business here. But like you said, these neoliberals in the UK, they're captured by that kind of mentality, this Euro mentality, this neoliberal Euro mentality that they can't escape. Go ahead, Marcus.
It's certainly the case, Peter, that most of Britain's exports go to the European Union. And after the 31st of December of this year, most of Britain's exports will continue to go to the European Union, but under different rules. That is assuming, of course, a free trade deal is not reached between London and Brussels. But only a few months ago, Peter, Britain secured a highly impressive trade deal with Japan. Now, barely any of the newspapers in Britain were reporting on that. And it is very significant because after the British people decided that they wanted to leave the European Union in June 2016, the neoliberals were saying that foreign investors, for example, the Japanese, would pull out of Britain. Well, not only did they not pull out after 4.5 years, but they have now signed, as I said, a mightily impressive trade deal with Britain. So foreign investors such as the Indians, the Japanese and the Chinese and others are remaining in Britain. And also, Peter, the British economy is one of the most powerful, it's one of the most robust in the world. It has been around for centuries. The fact that Britain might not secure a trade deal with the EU is not going to end the British economic powerhouse that it is. And I would say also, Peter, there are two principal reasons why I supported Brexit. Firstly, to curtail immigration, which is a big problem. It has placed a major strain on schools and hospitals throughout the UK. But secondly, it will mean that the Supreme Court of England and Wales will be supreme. It will not be subservient to any court in the European Union. I am not under any illusions, Peter, that after the 31st of December of this year, people in Britain will start to feel economic benefits. No, in my opinion, the economic system in Britain is still a feudal one. It is still one that serves the rich. But for me, the fact that the Supreme Court of England and Wales will be supreme on English soil is very important for me, and it is important for English people and indeed British people across the UK.
Yeah. Having the supremacy only comes from one power. This is what this postmodernist ideology deems. It cannot have separate centers of power here. Glenn, one of the things, looking at this whole saga, as an American living in Moscow, okay, so I think I have a unique perspective. It seems to me the negotiating strategy that Brussels has had it all along is to make it as hard as possible, maximum pain, because they know the UK, well, it is out and it will be completely out on the last day of this year, but they're sending a message to everyone else in the European Union. If you would think about, regaining your sovereignty, look what we did to the Brits, okay? And it will be painful, okay? And again, this is ideologically driven, okay? Because of course, how can you not want to be part of the most progressive, advanced civilization in history? It's very much what the Soviets used to say to the Eastern Europeans. Go ahead, Glenn.
Well, yeah, many British economists have been making this argument, which is if the EU and Britain has too clean of a divorce and the British actually succeed to outside the EU, it would create too many incentives for other breakaway political groups within the EU. So obviously there is this hanging over their heads. But even we tend to speak about the EU versus Britain, but the EU is not necessarily a unitary actor either. They do have their own internal battles. So within the EU, for example, I think the Germans and the Dutch, they're more prepared to make a deal and absorb some of this pain from seeing Britain get a good deal on the outside, while the French might.
You used the word pain. Okay, that's how we're going to end this part of the program. We're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on some real news. Stay with our team.
Я думал, что после первого раза меня ничего не удивит, а в должности лечащего врача я пересмотрел свои взгляды. Ты только пациента отправляешь в реанимацию тяжелого, и спустя какое-то время его койка, 10-20 минут, и койка уже занимается новым больным. И понимаешь, что это никогда не прекратится. Попав в реанимацию, я название такое этому подобрал. Есть бал сатаны, а то, что я видел в реанимации, это, знаете, утро, отходники после бала сатаны, что происходило там. Тяжело врачам-реаниматологам, они всегда мнение такое бытует, что остаются за кадром, и хочу им тоже благодарность оставить здесь. Они на самой передовой, на мой взгляд, борются.
چشما میبینیم که در روز درنجر سرنجر میزنن در دمین چسبکی میزنن در کابل در شهر مزار
و همین که گفتم ما پیش اینا خورد کلان شدیم و کارکرد اینا رو که دیدیم این سبب شد که من علاقه پیدا کنم. یعنی یک خانم میتونه یک معلم خوب باشه، وقتی یک خانم میتونه یک مادر خوب باشه، پس 100%.
چند ساعت مو باندې مرغۍ تیریږي، اوس خو په ځان نه ډارېږم.
لما سره چې کېدل هغه خو وسولو سترګې مې له لاسه ورکړلې ټول بدن باندې زخمي شوم اوس کوم ډار در سره هغه مې د اولادو در سره د کور مې در سره 24 ساعت په دغه مرګ ما باندې ته تیریدو
اونا که بادش خالی میتونه ما باید دولت که پشت ما باید بکنیم به خاطر که اگه ما بشینم شکست بکنم دیگران نمیرن دیگران مشکل دیگه بیا مردم رویا بگیره وطن خود جور کنیم آباد کنیم توقع بدبختی
Is your media a reflection of reality? In a world transformed, what will make you feel safer? Isolation or community? Are you going the right way or are you being led somewhere? Which direction? What is truth? What is fake? In a world corrupted, you need to descend. So join us in the depths, or remain in the shallows.
Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Labelle. To mind you, we're talking about some real news. Okay, let's go back to Marcus in London. We talked about the divorce of Brexit, seeing the European Union finally let go of the UK after the referendum in 2016. But now we have the ramifications of the 2020 election in the United States. Now, coming up into the election, and actually ever since Trump ran president in the 2016 campaign, there's been this talk of a cultural civil war in the United States. And it's actually very real. It's very real culturally here. Now, as a result of this election here, it's a bizarre election. I will leave it at that. But it has rekindled a lot of very strong passions among people in the United States, and we could use the terms red and blue here. And those tensions are only simmering here, particularly when you have the media and the professional elites all on one side, and then you have these people that were supporters of Donald Trump. Donald Trump got 10 more million votes than he did 4 years ago, though somehow he lost the election here. Passions are very, very high, Marcus, and sometimes you can't unring bells, if you know what I mean. Go ahead.
First of all, Peter, I want to clarify something. The people who are pursuing the agenda in America, which is both culturally divisive and culturally incompatible, are neither liberals nor Marxists. They're not liberals in the classical sense, such as David Lloyd George or Henry Asquith, and they are certainly not Marxists. If the BLM rabble were to go to Cuba and say to the Cuban authorities, "We are Marxists," I think they would be on the receiving end of the Cuban authorities. No, these people are neoliberals, and it is abundantly clear that this cultural agenda could, and I emphasize could, make people in certain states in America think that we have nothing in common with states such as California, states such as New York, states such as Michigan. Now, I don't foresee any secession in the immediate future, but nonetheless, the foundation for a potential secession in the future could be being laid as we speak now. Because if Joe Biden does go on to assume the presidency, if he does enter the White House in 2021, which is looking like he will now, he is going to play the BLM card even further. And that will be, in my opinion, highly detrimental to cultural unity in America. And I think what we are seeing here, Peter, is another example of a major flaw of liberal democracies. because America, like Britain, is a liberal democracy. But when you have a culture which has been split, when you have very powerful elements within the establishment which are pursuing an agenda which is highly dangerous, highly poisonous, and incompatible with most people in the given country, America or Britain, what it requires is a very strong leader to deal with that threat. Donald Trump in the summer of this year spoke about making Antifa and BLM illegal movements. He spoke about classifying them as terrorist movements, which I believe they are. The violence from the BLM movement has been absolutely abominable. It has been absolutely atrocious. And because America is a liberal democracy,
Marcus, you're told it's mostly peaceful. I mean, I think that's the cliche of the year, mostly peaceful, okay? And don't believe your lying eyes, okay? I mean, it's amazing how the media has been so dishonest about this. Glenn, but I tend to agree that, I mean, there's a lot of people that like to push the envelope on this topic about secession in America, but there is secessionism of the mind. I think that is very, very real now. The number of people that don't watch the Oscars or the Grammys, they don't want to watch football because of the Black Lives Matter issue here. I mean, more and more people are boycotting and having almost kind of a monastic state of mind, state of living. And I understand them because I agree with them. I'm sick and tired of this cultural garbage. It's an insult to traditions, and some of them are great traditions, and through history, traditions that are not so great, you move away from them, or you amend them, or you change them. You do it through time, and you do it through consensus. But the left here, I mean, they're just out for annihilation, okay? If you don't agree, you don't exist. Go ahead, Glenn.
Well, I don't foresee any secession in the foreseeable future either. But what was interesting this week is it came at the forefront of the rhetoric. That is, leading conservative pundits such as Rush Limbaugh, Ben Shapiro, others began to argue that this is becoming a possibility. And then they also had some activities on the ground, such as the Texas GOP, who called for a union of state to support the Constitution because their lawsuit to challenge the election results was denied. And meanwhile, you have a Democratic lawmaker now who asks Pelosi to deny seats to all Republicans who supported these legal efforts to contest the election. So, but again, this is something that's been building over time. And I wouldn't even agree that it would be started with Trump, because a lot of this has decades of history behind it. Because over the past decades, the United States has become increasingly politically segregated. That is, Republicans and Democrats move to more politically homogenous neighborhoods. Fewer and fewer Americans know people belonging to the other political party. Empathy is dropping very rapidly, and they don't get their news from the same source, as you pointed out. And now they're even reluctant to use the same social media. And they don't anymore watch the same cultural events, such as the Grammys. And they know less and less about each other. And over the past years, this has reached a point where the political opposition are more and more deemed to be an enemy rather than someone who envisions a different path. So it's not just that their identities and values have drifted apart, but now they actually see themselves as being in direct opposition to each other, asking whether or not they can actually live side by side. And the conservatives especially has felt very much squeezed in this culture war, because Hollywood has become more and more liberal. The universities have steadily become more and more liberal, with hardly any conservative staff anymore. And conservatives are now seeing universities almost like an indoctrination camp, which they pay heavily for. And all of this has now intensified with woke politics.
That's exactly what the university system is, okay? I mean, people go hugely into debt to be programmed for an economy that they're not prepared for, okay? Unless everyone's going to be a diversity advisor, which I suppose is not impossible here. Marcus, the thing is that, traditionally, and I think around the Western world here, is once you have an election, you try to, you put out a signal of some kind of, we have to come together. Now, nominally, Mr. Biden has said that, okay? But then you have a lot of people, this Trump accountability project. I mean, basically going out and saying, okay, now we're going to go after everyone that was in his orbit for the next 3 years. They'll never publish again. They'll never work again. They will be shamed. They'll be doxxed. I mean, this is going down with the mindset that Glenn just described here. I mean, this isn't you have to annihilate your opposition. You don't deal with it. You don't negotiate with it. You certainly don't compromise with it. And at least in my opinion, this kind of hostility, this zero-sum hostility comes from one side primarily. Go ahead, Marcus.
Indeed, Peter. If Joe Biden truly wants to attempt to heal the divisions, to heal the bitter wounds in American society, then he and the rest of his administration and also the liberal media or the neoliberal media in America must cease in demonizing Donald Trump, in demonizing the people around him, in demonizing his supporters. If they do that, then yes, there is a possibility that America could, and I emphasize could, weather the storm in the short term. I still believe that the divisions and the wounds are there for the long term. However, will a Joe Biden presidency do that? I think not. Will the neoliberal media in America do that? I certainly think not. I believe that if Joe Biden enters the White House, this will be an opportunity, especially for the neoliberal media in America, to take vengeance on Americans who supported Donald Trump. And therein lies the seeds for future disaster in America. Because in my opinion, Peter, the catalyst for divisions in America is not actually race, it's actually poverty. And that raises another issue. The Republican and Democratic parties, they are multi-millionaire parties. They are elitist parties. It is not in their interest to change the economic system in America because it suits them. However, the focus is now on race, and I do not believe that is the catalyst. Yes, there are certainly troublemakers in America, for example, the BLM movement, but I believe that it is economics that is causing the divisions in America. And unless that is addressed, then yes, there could be secession in the future. But I do believe that the demonization of Donald Trump and the demonization of his supporters will continue. I believe more credence, more power will be given to BLM, more legitimacy will be given to BLM. And of course, Peter, action, reaction, it's the law of the jungle. If you strike someone on their face, they're going to strike you back, and then it will be tit for tat.
You know, Glenn, I completely agree with Marcus here, because I certainly think that this race issue is artificially foisted into the political narrative here. It's class. And there's an amazing opportunity here, and as a conservative, and not as a member of the Republican Party, but as a conservative, I think for me, I will be watching to see if the GOP can understand what happened in the 2020 election, where it expanded its base. Its tent is bigger than ever before, and it was because of class. And if they can finally jettison their ridiculous libertarian ideas around the economy, they have a path to recast American politics along class lines, which I think it certainly should be, because that's a winning coalition. And that remains to be seen. But these cultural wars, well, I really get tired when the GOP gets sucked into it, because they don't know how to fight them, because they don't start them. I'll give you the last 15 seconds. Go ahead, Glenn.
No, and I agree with that. And but I would also add that the US, it has mechanisms against this, against secession, which means empowering the actual states. What if they really want to, have this come together? They need to allow the state system to work, so decentralize the power. But it seems they're going the other way now by imposing this ideals.
And I have to interrupt you here, but there was a number of states that went to the Supreme Court about this election, and they weren't given a hearing. That's all the time we have, gentlemen. I want to thank my guests in Oslo and London. I want to thank our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, crosstalk rules.